Good morning, everyone. The webinar will begin in just a minute.
Good morning, everyone. This is Melinda Huntley with the Ohio Travel Association, and I want to welcome all of you to this morning's webinar on messaging and the media. And just so you are aware, we will share the recording of this webinar on our website, and we'll also post it some additional information in our daily updates. So, feel free to forward this webinar to partners you may have that you feel should hear the message as well. Just a couple of announcements I want to make. First of all, many of you have reopened. Some of you are in the process of reopening. Just so you're aware that there will be a press conference Thursday. Keep updated with our daily updates or tune in to the governor's press conference. The existing safety order has been extended through the end of the week, but he will be making an announcement on Thursday. From what I am hearing from his office is that there will perhaps be a shift to more local health department control, which is a good thing. So I hope all of you are working closely with your local health departments. So the other thing that I want to mention is just last week, the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which is money that can go for state and local governments. There was a ruling that money could be used to fund travel promotion and safety messages for DMOs and CVBs. To learn more about that, go to our daily updates. We have a link to a fact sheet. Other than that, the latest surveys that we've seen come out, there was a survey just out from Destination Analysts. And for the second consecutive week, there was a little shift in sentiment in that people were, fewer people were planning to plan a trip. I think there's concern over what they're seeing. So 37% had said that they don't have any trips planned the next 3 months, where that was hovering at about 30%. However, what's really interesting is that 35% said, their decision could be reversed if the right opportunity was presented to them. So they might be willing to travel if something was offered to them that they thought was appealing and that they felt comfortable with. What do they feel comfortable with? Something that's not crowded and also affordable. There was also in that study some information, saying the tone of travel advertisements right now, that they prefer, 53% prefer honesty, and 51% a friendly voice, versus 12% who said a more serious tone. So they still want to hear the hospitality and friendliness at the same time that you're telling them important information. Deals, packages, safety, things to see and do, and itineraries and road trips are still leading the content that travelers are desiring. So this is perfect timing for this webinar, because as we reopen, of course, there is both the opportunity and the challenges of working with the media. So before we get started, though, I want to turn things over to Matt MacLaren, Chief of Tourism Ohio, to provide his industry update and to give us a glimpse at what Tourism Ohio has planned.
Hey, thank you, Melinda. And if we can go to the next slide here. You've done a wonderful job, the Ohio Travel Association, of keeping the industry informed during this very difficult time. And the last time I had the opportunity to speak on a webinar with OTA was very early April, at the beginning of this pandemic. And we're still in the pandemic. But what we've found is that we are learning ways to live during the time of COVID-19 and to reopen our businesses and start conducting business again. But the world certainly is different. If we could go to the next slide. We've learned that consumers are willing to travel again, but they're looking for drive-to destinations, which are something Ohio is a strength for Ohio. Visiting friends and family, also a strength for Ohio, and safety. And safety is one of the things I want to focus on with my remarks today. It should be a strength for Ohio. If we could go to the next slide here. The Longwoods research shows up to 70% of people are either traveling or planning their next trip. But 26% say they won't feel comfortable going to a place that is slow to social distance. 44% are putting a focus on sanitation. And that cleaning and hygiene plan that our businesses now are putting in place, that's one of the most important things, that businesses having that in place to have consumers keep coming. We can go to the next slide. For us, that means Ohio Find It Here has started marketing safety. Since early May, you've seen our commercials showing face coverings, showing social distancing, showing hand sanitizer and washing hands, something that we will continue to show, showing the consumer that businesses in Ohio have taken steps to make their business safe for them to travel. We know this is needed. We know this is needed because the traveler is putting a premium on safety. And if they don't feel safe, we saw it back in March, you see it in some of the numbers now as we see an increase in coronavirus, they won't travel. To have the sustained numbers our industry wants, and quite honestly, for friends, family, and employees to be safe, these measures are in place. We go to the next slide. But one of the shifts that we're seeing is that marketing to businesses or that businesses are safe isn't enough. Also encouraging consumers to be safe is one of the things that we're now doing with Ohio Find It Here. And I'm happy to say one of the things that the U.S. Travel Association included in their new toolkit. A toolkit that came out last week that I know the Ohio Travel Association is going to make available to everyone. This toolkit encourages the industry to show how businesses are safe, that tourism businesses are safe, by the employees wearing masks, by social distancing signage and information at those businesses, and by the washing hands and hand sanitizer that are taking place, and other things too, including the health checks for employees and more. But also included in this toolkit, U.S. Travel Association, something that I completely agree with and that we will begin doing and actually have begun doing. And that's a message encouraging the consumer when they're out visiting to keep the employees, to keep the friends, to keep their family safe, that those consumers should also be wearing face coverings, abiding by the social distancing standards, and using the hand sanitizer and washing hands. Go to the next slide here. And it's even more important right now because we're seeing headlines like this. headlines that over 50,000 cases have now been reported in the state of Ohio. And even worse in Texas, headlines that the increase in the coronavirus cases there has led to bars closing again and restaurants having to have their capacity reduced. If we could go to the next slide. So safety, you're right, Ohio is doing very well with being a drive-to state. Ohio does very well with a state where people want to visit friends and family. We need to continue to be a state where we do well with safety. And part of that message is not just showing that businesses are safe, something that I encourage all of you to do and that we've been doing with Ohio Find It Here, but now encouraging the consumer to be safe too, so that we can continue to reopen, that businesses can stay open, and that the employees and all of those in the industry can be safe during this difficult time. The 3 signs that you see here, social distance, wash hands, and wear masks, are ones that we've created that will go up on our website and are going up in rest areas across the state of Ohio. And you'll also see both in our marketing, but also in our public relations as we begin speaking to reporters across the state, talking points, encouraging consumers to partake in these behaviors too, so that businesses can stay open and employees can continue to stay healthy. With that, I want to go to the next slide and introduce our public relations company, Paul Werth. Celina Fabrizio is been wonderful to work with. They came on in February, and almost immediately we were in crisis mode, figuring out what the right message has been. And as you know, that message has had to shift several times over the past several months during a very interesting 2020. I do appreciate the advice they've been able to give us to help get it right as we're now projecting that message of safety, but also just the general, it comes back to the foundation of what public relations is and how you conduct a media interview to make sure that in this difficult time, the message that you want is what's being heard. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Celina to give us information about public relations. Celina?
Thank you, Matt. Thanks so much. So just to give everyone just a quick little background. So before I moved over to public relations, I was in the television news business for about 10 years. And so that actually offers me and our team an opportunity to kind of know how they think, what they're looking for in interviews and when they're putting different stories together. So let's go ahead and kind of get into, you're getting the Reader's Digest version of how to deliver strategic messages for the media. Next slide, please. And we're going to start by just giving you a quick overview of kind of the state of the media today. It's changed so much just within, I would say, even the last 10 years. The traditional media used to, do their story, file the story, it would go to, the newspaper, or it would go to the 5 or 6 o'clock news, and that would be it. But now the traditional media is being asked to push their stories to multiple platforms. So, not only will they have to post to social, but they, we'll put it automatically to the web, and sometimes break stories on the web before it even makes their outlet. A lot of times we're also seeing where print reporters will come and do interviews, but they'll want to get you on video and then, include maybe a 30-second brief interview on their website. So it's important to know that if you're going to be doing an interview with a reporter, you might be used across multiple platforms, and just to be prepared for that. I mean, when you think about it, how many of us probably woke up this morning and the first thing we did was grab our phone to see if there was any sort of news happening? And that's just showing that 93% of adults right now are getting their news online. And just, as you receive some different media requests, a lot of times, print reporters, they're the ones that tend to be most prepared. They really like to dig into stats and do their homework. And so they're the ones that will definitely be most prepared. A lot of times TV reporters are going from, one story to another Things will change in the middle of the day and they'll have to be shifted to a different story. So I always say if you're going to have an opportunity to pitch news media, I always love to say, offer them some one-stop shopping. If you are featuring, maybe you're going to do a story at, Kalahari or Cedar Point or Kings Island, any of those, and you're with a CVB, offer to meet them there so that they can kind of get everything that they need at once. Or if you're doing interviews via Zoom, maybe offer a panel situation where they could interview 2 or 3 people at once if necessary. Let's go to the next slide. And before we kind of dive into how to create and deliver a strategic message, I think another important thing to remember is that right now, everyone with a cell phone is a journalist, in the sense of they could use their phone to catch any sort of anything that's happening. I think we've seen all that really unfold in the last few months, where they might catch something and the next thing you know, it's viral or the news media has picked that up. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind and to be prepared in case anything like that happens with your organization or you need to react to that. So preparing is one of the best things that you can do when it comes to conducting an interview. And what we always like to say is, kind of before you sit down and do that, sit down and think about, all right, what is my goal for the interview? What is your number one goal? Is it you want to make sure that everyone knows that you are open, that things are safe, and that you are ready to, with open arms to the public? Think about what that first message should be. And then with that, kind of limit yourself to 3 key themes. I mean, if you're trying to put in 4 or 5 messages, it's going to get lost. It's way too many messages. So really sit down and we like to call it the message triangle, but think to yourself, okay, number 1 is my top message. But if I could squeeze in a couple more, what would 2 be? What would 3 be? And I will say a lot of times when we conduct media trainings with different organizations, they're usually about, honestly, 3-4 hours long. We really sit down with the group and go through message development, how to plan, how to respond. We put them on camera. So this is a really big part of what we talk about. And that's just thinking about what you want those 3 key themes to be. It's also important to think about, say only what you want the reporter to emphasize. If you don't want the reporter to take something out of context or inflate the importance of anything you say, then don't say it. So that's just a rule to live by. The other thing too is stay positive. Make sure that you're, using the positive language that you want to make sure you're conveying about what's happening right now. Also, make sure you stick to your game plan. There are a lot of times reporters will ask you the same question more than once. Don't be confused or thrown off. A lot of times, maybe they're trying to get you to say it in a different way or get you to say it in a more concise way. Because really, when reporters are asking you questions, ultimately they would love to get kind of that, for TV, I would say that 10 to 12 second, sound bite is what they call it, that they can put on the TV. Same with, newspapers, radio. They want to be able to just kind of concisely convey what you're trying to say. Let's go to the next slide, please. So for example, and I'll just take Ohio Find It Here, for example. We've spent the last couple of weeks really talking through the safety message and making sure that Ohio is known for being a leader in safety, but we also want tourists to think about that as well and protect those businesses that have invested so much to open back up. So in a sense, we kind of came up with some key messages. So one, we want people to know that Ohio businesses are open and ready for tourists to make new memories. Two, that Ohio is one of the only states in the country using safety at the forefront of its marketing. It's really up to all of us to follow these safety guidelines to ensure businesses can stay open, the economy can recover, and jobs can come back. And we want Ohioans to know if they put safety first by washing their hands, wearing masks, and social distancing, they will be able to continue making memories that last. So again, we're just, we wrote out and thought about what are some 3 key themes that if we keep hitting that home, it'll finally resonate. And so you want to do that when you're interviewing. You want to do that possibly in your social media, if you're writing blogs. So really you want to take that message and pound it home so that it starts to resonate. Let's go to the next slide. The other thing, and I think both Melinda and Matt already hit this point, but you want to know your audience. And right now we're seeing that the health and safety factors are becoming really important to travelers. And so that's why you're going to want to incorporate that safety message into any of the interviews that you're doing. I was able to kind of get my hands on some research that was done by a television group that has about 90 some television stations across the United States. And one thing that really came out was that viewers want to know that we're here, meaning that the media are here to help them, help keep them safe by providing information to manage this new environment. So there's really this thirst for wanting to know, okay, where can I go? Who's doing what to protect me? That is something that's really important. And so like this picture right here, I've been very safe through all this. And when we saw that the Cameron Mitchell restaurants opened back up, they were very clear about communicating what their safety protocols were. And so that really was the first restaurant that we went to, ate inside, followed the safety protocols because we felt safe. And so I think that's why it's so important to communicate these messages. That same research also showed that 75% of the respondents are practicing social distancing and 69% are wearing face coverings. Next slide. So answering questions from the media. A lot of times, reporters sometimes will tend to lure you away from your pre-planned message points. And, that's not something that they're wanting to do to embarrass you, but they're just, their stories are more interesting if they can get their interviewees to respond spontaneously rather than to just form their talking points. But that's important to remember when you're talking to them. So some key tactics would be to don't repeat negative words. So sometimes a reporter might say, so you're worried about your, maybe you're worried about your community. So if they ask you that question, don't repeat that phrase. Don't say, yes, we're really worried about our community. I mean, don't repeat negative questions that they're using or negative phrases. Just go ahead and say, well, we are confident that we are ready for travelers and here's what we've done. So again, it kind of goes back to writing out what those key points are that you're going to hit and just kind of going back to them. So we call this pivoting. And if you watch any sort of any news program, and you'll see whether it's political pundits, you'll notice how they will pivot from the question that was asked and then just kind of take it to where they want to take it. So we call that pivoting. And so a lot of times you can make your main points regardless of the question you are asked. For instance, you could say, well, that's a good question, but first what I want to make sure is this, this, and this. So there's a way to do it and make sure you're hitting your message points. It's also really important to know too that don't ever to pretend to know something you don't. Sometimes the best answer is just, let me get back to you on that. And I can get you, either an answer later, or I could also put you in contact with somebody who might have the best information for you. So don't ever be worried about saying that. They definitely respect that honesty, and they would rather just be pointed in the right direction, or wait a few minutes, or wait a couple hours to get the correct information. The other thing too to remember is to be prepared to talk about other issues. If a reporter has some time with you and talks to you about travel, but maybe there's something going on within your community or within your organization, just be prepared and think, okay, this might come up. And if that is the case, think about, all right, if this question comes up, how do we want to answer that? So always be thinking of that. The other thing too is, really demonstrate your strength with empathy. So what I mean by that is, be yourself, and, don't be afraid to just really kind of show that empathy that you're feeling. Look, I understand that, that people might be a little bit, people want to know about safety, and that's why we're here. We want them to know that we're doing this, this, and this to make sure that their experience here will be, fun and safe. So just, again, just use that empathy, use your personality. Don't be afraid to show that. Next slide. So just to give you some vocal, visual, and now virtual tips. That's a new one that we're talking through. So again, just know your message and deliver it in your own way. Avoid jargons and filler words. A lot of times, different organizations, we like to call it alphabet soup, and they'll use, ETA, and they'll use all these different abbreviations for things that the general public doesn't really understand. So really try to speak, very conversationally. I always say, when we were in the news business, we would say, okay, try to communicate like, your whole audience, they're fifth graders. Really try to keep it simple and understandable, and don't use necessarily the travel jargon. Just use words that they would understand. Use action sentences, not necessarily passive language. What I mean by that is, like passive would be safety is something we're concerned about, but more active would be like, our top priority is safety. So really think about, kind of having that action sentence. It's clear, it's concise, it probably makes a better quote or a soundbite. As more and more of us are being asked to do Zoom calls and FaceTime and Teams, many reporters are just doing these interviews via web and FaceTime. And so, always make sure you have a few minutes before the interview to kind of test your audio and your video to make sure how it looks, how it sounds. Make sure you have a strong internet connection. I think we've already seen even cases on national news where the interview just goes south because they're having technical difficulties. If you are using Zoom, Skype, or FaceTime, or any of those video features, you want to. We tend to have the habit of kind of looking down at who you're talking to, but you really kind of want to look at your camera, because you have to think about that camera in your laptop or in your phone is kind of you communicating with either that person or their viewer. So try to really look at the camera. As far as lighting goes, really try to position yourself in front of a window or a strong light. You don't really want all that light behind you, or else, you know, you're going to end up looking darker, and you're not going to look as, you're not going to necessarily look your best. Let's go to the next slide. So this we put together. It's for all of you. It's kind of your little media cheat sheet. So this is something that if you want to print this out and put it up on in your home office or wherever you are. So this first set of tips is really kind of what to know before the interview. So again, this kind of summarizes what we've talked about. So really know your audience, educate yourself on any biases of the reporter. I mean, look, do a little digging into the reporter that is going to interview you or the publication that they're from. A lot of times you can tell just by Googling some of their previous stories what their angle typically is or what their style is. And so it's always good to do a little bit of that research ahead of time. Set your goal again. So just kind of know prior to the interview what you want your goal to be. Matt and I, a lot of times when we're sitting down and strategizing, we think to ourselves, okay, what do we want? If we could write our own headline, what would we want that headline to be? And then we kind of work backwards from there. So that's always a good little trick. Again, pick your 3 key themes. So sit down with your little message triangle and think about and rehearse how you want to deliver those messages. Anticipate the questions. A lot of times when we set up interviews, our clients will say, well, can we get a question? Can we get a list of all the questions that the reporter is going to ask beforehand? And I will tell you, 9 times out of 10, that does not happen. You usually do not get to see what those questions are. There are times, you know, we can ask what are some general questions you might ask, and we'll get lucky enough and the reporter will send us a few of those. But I would say don't plan on it. So sit down and really anticipate what you think those questions would be, and write out some strong answers. And just take a deep breath. You know, make sure you're focused and relaxed before the interview begins. It's really easy to get nervous, and you really shouldn't be. And then during the interview, you know, be authentic. You're having a conversation with the audience. You know, don't be afraid to be positive and have fun and show your personality. Be clear. So again, speaking a language your audience understands. Say only what you want the reporter to emphasize. So don't throw in anything that could be taken out of context. Again, don't pretend to know something you don't, and stick to your game plan. Don't let them throw you off. And a lot of times when talking about stick to your game plan, when we do these media trainings and we put people on camera and kind of play the role of the reporter, at the end, we'll always say, and any good reporter will do this, is there anything that I didn't ask? Or is there anything that you wanted to add? And a lot of times when we're doing the trainings, they'll just say, nope, I'm good. Well, the truth is you just passed up an opportunity to say exactly what you want to say. So if you're being interviewed and you feel like maybe you didn't get that opportunity to kind of get your main talking point, that's when you can say, you know what, there is something I wanted to make sure we talked about. It's this, this, and this. And even if they don't ask it, I think if you start to see that they're starting to wrap up, don't be afraid to say, you know what, before we wrap up, I'd like to add one more thing. And then you can go ahead and try to get your main point or points in there. Next slide. Okay, so I am going to pass this back over to Melinda and the team, and I think we have some time to take some questions. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. So anyone who has questions, you can use the chat function or the Q&A Either one is fine. Feel free to put questions in. I had a couple questions, and really I just, a couple questions and a couple of things I just wanted you to comment on. One, so when you're talking about don't repeat negative words, such great advice. So can you talk a little bit about why, if you repeat those negative words, what that can do, right? So in fact, you've just created like a quote, right? So
Exactly.
just kind of build on that a little bit more, so they understand that relationship.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and that's exactly what you're saying is, if you end up repeating those negative words, you're kind of affirming that negativity is true. So if you repeat something that they're saying, and if they're being negative and you kind of repeat that phrase, then again, yes, you've now created a quote that could be used in, again, social, it could be used. And again, it's not like it's just going to go to one source. That stuff can now go to, 4 different places. It could go on their website. It could go on social media. It could go in the news story. Maybe they create a podcast out of it. Again, it's just, you want to be as positive and trained on your messaging as possible. So don't get sucked into that concept, because there are times, and I'm a former reporter, and I don't think any of them want to trip people up at all. They just want to get an interesting quote from you. So sometimes they'll throw some things in to try to get that, and don't fall into that trap. So, and I do want to reiterate too, if any of you have any questions following this, feel free to email me, or if something comes up and you just feel like you just aren't quite sure what to do, you're more than welcome to email me.
So that kind of brings up another point, and we heard this in a webinar, I think it was 2 weeks ago. Let's say someone's out there and they get a call from someone, and just, a little voice in the back of your head saying, ooh, this person seems to be digging for a story, and it could possibly be a negative spin. So what advice would you give if that phone call should be received?
Well, I mean, again, I think it goes back to being prepared. And, I always, you almost have to assume the worst and think about, okay, if this is the story angle that they're coming for, how can we position our message triangle to make sure that if they do come and do the interview, we can kind of control how that goes. And so, positive language, I think, is a control factor in interviews. I mean, a lot of times you can't necessarily, you can't really control what the reporter will ask you, but you control what you say. So, again, it's just being prepared, thinking about what that might be, and maybe even look for an angle that maybe they haven't thought about that might interest them more. And I didn't get to say this when we were going through our training, but the other thing that the media really, they love to tell stories about real people. They don't necessarily want to interview, officials, and, they want real people. So whenever there's a possibility of doing an interview, look for somebody who, look for a visitor that might be a really good advocate for you that they could interview. Maybe look for a family that has already come to your venue and had a really positive experience, that maybe has some pictures that they could share. So I would say it's really important for all of you to kind of build up an advocate list of visitors who have had positive experiences that you think might be good spokespeople. And that's a good way to kind of strengthen your story.
Well, and Celina, this is Matt, and I'll add to that. Think of businesses in your community that are doing things right and good spokespeople as well. Because a lot of the questions I think we're going to get in the near future here will be around safety, and having that well-spoken person who runs a restaurant or retail who can talk about the measures they now have in place and their business is a good thing to have to be able to refer to any reporters.
That's great advice. So if you get what we have heard in the past, let's say you get that call, you have a feeling, it's going south, likely the reporter's, looking for something negative. What are your thoughts on, saying, look, you've already said, say you don't know, or you're going to get back to them. What are your thoughts on responding with a written statement versus a phone call?
Yeah, I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And we've seen reporters and sometimes who actually prefer that. I will say that, I think it just really depends on the situation. Sometimes I think when people send a written statement, like, okay, here's just our statement, it almost comes off as, well, apparently they didn't feel comfortable being interviewed. And so sometimes I think that does convey a message that maybe you weren't prepared or didn't, felt a little bit defensive. Mm-hmm. So that's where I think you just kind of have to play it by ear. I mean, everybody has a right to decline an interview or decline to answer a question, but again, anything that you say or do or how you communicate with them can then be communicated in that story. So, you don't necessarily want, well, we've reached out to this organization, but they did not want to do an interview and all they did was issue this statement. So you really have to kind of weigh the positive and the negative of that. Now, there are times when reporters are so busy and maybe you guys are swamped and can't necessarily stop to do an interview with them. And you can say, you know what, send me all your questions and I will write them out. And then if you have any other questions, we can take it from there. And there are times reporters really appreciate that because they're just as busy as everybody else.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
So, you talk about be prepared. And let's just talk a little bit about what potential things could happen, right? Or people could reach out that you need to just have a response ready. I mean, number one, which we've seen, what happens when people that are visiting are not abiding by the safety regulations, and all it takes is, right, one or two people to post Instagram, and all of a sudden the media is saying, you're not complying with safety standards, even if you are. So, I mean, I think that's, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, Celina, but that is one thing you should be prepared to respond to, correct?
Yes, I mean, definitely. And I think a lot of organizations are doing it right in the sense of, they're clearly stating on their website what their new procedures are. They're sharing it on social media. Hey, before you come here, this is what's happening. So I think in a way, a lot of times you're going to protect yourself by making sure you're communicating that ahead of time. And so if a reporter, gets on this story and gets a complaint, but if they go back and see that you've clearly communicated what should happen, that protects you, definitely. And then I think, again, it goes back to that, empathy. And, if you have to do an interview and just say, look, we've been doing everything we can to keep our customers safe. We've done this, we've done this, we've done this. It just was really hard, it just, I don't know. I mean, our consumers maybe just didn't necessarily follow those safety guidelines, but we've made investments. We've communicated what our policies are, and we're going to revisit it and make sure this doesn't happen again.
Well, and Melinda, I think that's why it's so important, and your timing's great on this, to be having this webinar. A lot of businesses, a lot of places out there are thinking about how they communicate with the media to get more attention and more visitors right now. But really everyone, even if you're not thinking about how to approach the media, you need to be thinking about what your talking points would be if the media calls you. Because the media right now is also looking at those stories, especially coming up on the 4th of July and afterwards, about our industry. And it's always, preparation is always the best way to go about things, to be thinking about what your answers would be if you were to be getting a call from the media.
Perfect.
And I think that third party validation, again, that we've talked about, so many people are going to social media or talking to their friends about the experience. How was your experience there? Did you feel safe? Do you feel like they followed the guidelines? I mean, that's how so many people are going to make their decision about where they go, and as they kind of dip their toe into travel again. And so again, I think making sure that they have the most positive and safe experience that they can, they're gonna go back and talk to their friends. They're gonna post it on social media, and that's just gonna help everybody in the long run.
I'm glad you brought that up. One of the things that we've said in previous webinars is the importance of your employees and even their families. And they're a perfect audience to ask for help. They're a perfect audience to bring in for the experience and say, help us, share the experience you had, or your VIPs, your donors, your members, whomever that may be. They're going to be the ones that are most helpful, but they're also going to be the ones that are going to be willing to share their positive experiences. I want to get to another question that just came in, but one of the things I've also heard in order to be prepared is take a look at what's happening in your reviews, right? TripAdvisor, Yelp reviews, or on social media. What is the tone there? There may be something crop up there that actually, you should be prepared to respond to, because if you're seeing it on social media, so too is the media. So it's an opportunity to get ahead of the curve. If you start to see some negativity, be prepared and start prepping for a potential call then. So we had one question that came in that says, seems to be the perfect time to practice proactive PR. Would you agree? Love that question, because my next question was spot on. It was basically, we've talked a lot about how to respond, but, should our businesses right now be reaching out to the media proactively or waiting for them to call?
Absolutely. I mean, Bill, you're spot on. You definitely should be proactive, because when you're proactive, you are controlling the message as much as you can. You're sitting down and thinking about, okay, this is the story idea that we want to propose, or this is the news release that we want to get out to some of our local news outlets. And so when you're proactive, you can kind of put that idea in their head and have a little bit more control over it. When we're reacting, that's when we're already about 5 steps behind. So again, really think about, okay, what would be a really interesting story angle? Look for those real human stories. Maybe you have somebody that has been, coming to your venue every summer for the last 20 summers. That would be a really cool story idea. And make sure you say, okay, you know what? We're finally opening up, and this family's been coming to our place for 20 years and they're coming back, and we'd be happy to connect you with them. So look for those unique angles that you could also pitch to the media as well.
Another question came in. With the 4th of July around the corner and a beautiful forecast predicted, Ohio's lakes will most likely be packed. How do we best respond if the media calls questioning the number of people at our lakes?
Hey, Melinda, before we go there, I wanted to give an example of what I thought was a wonderful proactive interview that I just heard over the weekend. I had the opportunity to do a radio interview on Sunday, and before me on the interview was Frederick Bertley with COSI, and they're opening up on July 8th, and then to members and then to the public on July 15th. And he took that opportunity to tell everyone about what they can expect when they come into COSI. Everything from their requiring masks, and I loved his quote. He said, "We are a science center and science shows masks work, so we're requiring masks." He talked about how there's going to be hand sanitizer and the social distancing signs. He took on questions that the media wanted to report on, but also he's probably going to end up getting after they opened if he wasn't proactive with it. And by being out there, being in front, he sets that stage so that if there is any issues on down the line, he's already on record on what they've been doing to keep people safe and keep employees safe. I thought it was a wonderful approach.
Perfect.
And now on to the question about beaches, right? If they're crowded.
About lakes and beaches, yeah.
I'll give that to
even,
Celina.
you could take that even beyond,
Thanks,
lakes.
Matt.
I mean, it's basically, 4th of July weekend. If it's nice, it's going to impact, many different places. So the potential for more people being present exists. So how best? Your advice there?
Yeah, I mean, again, there are so many different different opinions, and I've seen a lot of different charts that have come out that really kind of rate kind of what the threat level is as far as COVID, and almost everything I've seen. And what I would do is, let's arm ourselves with some of those talking points and some of that research about kind of being outside. Outside seems to me to be one of the safest things going on right now. So what I would do is, let's prepare and let's look at some of that research and find some of those talking points, whether it be from the CDC or the Ohio Department of Health, talking about outside and the threat level and how that may protect you. But again, you also don't want to be in a position where kind of like the Lake of Ozarks that had like all those people crammed into one pool. I mean, you don't want to be on the news for that either. So again, it's communicating ahead of time what your policy is, communicating to your visitors that they also have to have skin in the game, and they have to be able to protect themselves, protect your other patrons, protect your employees. And again, the more information that shows that you've tried to relay that message ahead of time, I think protects you the best.
Yeah, Celina, you're exactly right. And it's not in our nature to think, okay, we need to be telling the visitors what they have to do when they come. We're usually just telling them to come. But times are different. And I was very happy to see that communicated in the U.S. Travel Toolkit, the information that they have there and stuff that Ohio Find a Here we're now putting in place, encouraging the visitors to take the same safety measures that you're seeing a lot of the employees being required to take, right? That encouragement, because Melinda, that case you brought up, a crowded beach, well, there's probably signs, there's definitely information out there, but that's consumer behavior. And the consumer, that's why we need to be encouraging them. Because when we know marketing works, and if we can market the face coverings, the social distancing, the washing hands, all those safety features, you're going to get better compliance, and that's going to be better for our industry as a whole.
So another question, what are the best practices or your recommendations for communicating if a staff member or employee tests positive for COVID-19?
And you guys are bringing out the heavy questions, aren't you? So are you punting that to me too, Matt?
This is where you guys do very well, Celina.
So again, I think it again boils down to just being honest. You don't need to release too much information. We've actually worked with just some different clients that have had this happen. And, in a way they kind of prepared ahead of time, almost like a COVID news release, kind of a template that if an employee tests positive, they have it kind of ready to go. Obviously, you would never name them, anything like that, but you would just, basically say, here's what happened. Here is what we've done to mitigate the situation. We are doing what we can to support our employee. You could even say, they're doing well, they're resting, that sort of thing. But just make sure that you're just open and honest. And here's what we've done. Since that employee has tested positive, we have, disinfected everything. We are constantly, taking temperatures of our staff. It's why our staff is required to wear face covering. So again, have like a 1 or 2 sentence statement. Talk about what you're proactively doing to continue keeping your other staff members and the customers safe. So in a way, I think everyone should kind of almost have that little news release already ready to go. And again, we want to, in that news release, it could say, and we want to reiterate what we've done, new safety precautions we've taken, and then just have a bullet list. We've put hand sanitizers. We are maintaining social distancing. We're requiring safety masks. We are disinfecting everything every single night. So again, kind of have that bullet list of what you're doing, and if there is, somebody that has worked closely with that employee, we are also asking, another person to quarantine for 2 weeks. So again, just honesty, and then safety, safety, safety. Here's what we're doing to maintain safety.
Matt, did you want to add anything?
Just that I agree. And really that's why we look to public relations specialists to help guide us. Those situations are almost look for their guidance even more than the proactive stuff. And I'd take a deep breath and figure out what your talking points are going to be. And if you do have professional assistance, consult them before you do make those responses.
So, and I also want to reiterate, Celina mentioned, her email, which we're going to send to you, Matt's email will send to you, my email. Like, I know it's cliche, but yes, hashtag, we are in this together. So if something were to happen, you have folks that you can talk to. Reach out to me, reach out to Matt, reach out to Celina, whatever it takes, because we know if something were to happen to one of us, it can impact many of our businesses. So please take advantage of that, and let us try to help you, or at least provide a chance to brainstorm ideas. What are your thoughts on that, Matt and Celina?
Absolutely agree. That's what we're here for. And especially if you think the article is going to be something bigger, they're talking about a region or about a state. I always appreciate being a call to let us know about it, especially if you think the reporter is going to end up calling us too.
Yes, yes. And the one thing I will caution, just based on not necessarily businesses in our industry, but what I've just heard about a business in another industry, be vigilant about those safety standards, those 5 protocols in your safety plan. Some of the businesses that have been open for the whole time, they're getting a little more laxed, particularly in the employee health checks, which in a situation I heard of has resulted in someone not only testing positive, but coming to work sick for 3 days. So, these plans are in place for a reason. And even though, the employees may complain about it in another month or so, we have to be vigilant. We have to make sure that safety is first, and that we maintain not just the facial covering, not just the sanitization, but how are you checking the health of your employees. Another question came in, and this is more proactive and engaging visitation, but what is your best advice for small organizations and small businesses right now? What do you think would be the best approach for them in this current timeline?
As far as just public relations in general?
Yes, yes.
So, I do think that if you're small and you can't afford and can't necessarily afford to have a consultant, again, I would say, take some of this advice that we provided today, and in a way, just really try to put together some things that we talked about. Make sure you have, kind of a list of advocates and spokespeople that you feel like would represent your organization or venue in a positive way. Sit down and just think about how to be prepared. Think about, what happens if this happens, and really kind of write out those questions, write out those scenarios, and think about how you would approach those and the best ways to approach those. Another thing too is just, start to build some really positive relationships. I mean, don't be afraid to build some positive relationships with some community media outlets or reporters. Look, if you have the opportunity, make sure you're being proactive on social media and kind of sending out a steady stream of content of things that are happening. Communicate some of your safety procedures, because sometimes just doing that alone might gain the attention of a reporter, and they may call you and want to do a story.
Yeah, and I do think there is an interest from the media in our industry right now. So both big and small, you have to figure out your comfort level. But those stories about what's reopening and what consumers can expect, right, to be different on the things that are reopening, like are face coverings required at museums? Are there going to be registrations required before you can get your ticket or something for zoos and more? Those type of things are getting covered by the media right now. So if someone wanted to be proactive, I'd say take a look at your comfort level. But I do think those stories are available now.
I also suggest, looking at the new experience, the new visitor experience that's all of a sudden come about because of the decreased capacity and the social distancing. I mean, I've said this before, but we very much talk about it as, oh my gosh, we have to put these guidelines in place. But in reality, what we're seeing elsewhere around the globe and the nation, and even in our own state now, is that sometimes, by doing this, we're being very, very creative. Businesses are being very creative, and they are offering experiences that an individual just couldn't have had a year ago because of that social distancing. So, identifying where could you actually use some of these protocols, particularly the social distancing, to really engage people in a more intimate experience with your attraction or business. Some positives that are resulting out of it. The way I say it, it's like VIP treatment is now for everybody, right? Because everyone walking through your door is VIP. So, don't be afraid to talk about the positives of visiting your subtraction or experience right now.
Absolutely.
Another question that came in, which is a little off subject on this sense, but has anyone heard of any creative social distancing implementations for dinner theaters?
That one's a little specific, Melinda.
It is specific, but I'm going to ask it because that was sent to us.
Yeah, so I do see a lot of places coming up with really creative ways, whether it's dining in the parking lot or using spaces that hadn't been used before for consumers. I've seen a lot of creative things out there, maybe not specific to dinner theaters, but I'll say this: the consumer is more patient and more willing to look at what new options provide social distancing, right? They're more patient and more willing to look at things now than I've ever seen them before. So whatever your particular circumstance, I would encourage you to get creative.
Perfect. Any other questions? Shoot them over, either the Q&A or the chat. And just going back to that question, this wasn't specific to dinner theaters, but one of the most creative things I've seen done, and I can't remember where this was done, was actually a restaurant that had kind of a field next to it, and they had picnic baskets on a pulley system. And so they were able to put tables set up, like these glorious table settings in this field, and they literally were like using a pulley system to deliver picnic baskets. I mean, I was like, that sounds like so much fun. So again, it's taking a situation that's less than perfect and, you know, trying to make lemonade out of it, trying to find a way to create an experience that you never would have had the ability to do before. And we're starting to see more and more businesses doing that.
And Melinda, we all need a little bit of that right now, right? That happiness that comes from seeing something like that or being part of the experience. It's been tough for a lot of people, and our industry is great at providing joy and happiness and excitement. And now we have to do it safely, but we can add those things back into a lot of people's lives with our reopening. And that's what is so great about Ohio's tourism industry.
Absolutely. I'm going to end on that note because that was perfect, Matt. I want to thank all of you for attending. If you have additional questions, feel free to shoot us emails. Celina, thank you for spending time with us this morning. Matt, thank you. And thanks to all of you in the virtual audience. So we will conclude the webinar now.
Great. And thank you, Melinda.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Bye.